One of Britain's finest photographers, Paul Joyce is celebrated for landscape and portrait work spanning 5 decades. He's been privileged to meet and befriend some of the great figures of 20th and 21st century culture, resulting in a remarkable body of work. Life Behind the Lens is a selection of his best images using the finest printers available. 40 years ago, the distinguished Colin Ford commissioned Paul to do a major exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery in London. It was called Elders and it became a photography landmark. Now, Colin has returned to curate Life Behind the Lens. But what has changed over all these years? And how does a photographer reach behind the surface to capture the essence of people and places he sees? Colin Ford tries to uncover some of these secrets.
What interests me in a way is what has changed for you since then. I mean, what I did when I saw your pictures in '77, I thought these are really good portraits of some very distinguished people. It may even be that some of the prints are hanging on the wall out there. I see that I quoted here Bill Brandt, Max Wall, Nicholas Pevsner, Ralph Richardson. They're all out there at the moment. What has changed since then?
The question was what has changed. The subjects have become younger.
And the photographers come older, yes. And
that's right. There's a greater difference. So Quentin Tarantino, for example, who I got to know as I wouldn't say as an intimate friend, but just as a friend, I met before anybody knew the name of Tarantino.
And how did that happen?
It happened through what skills I have as a documentary filmmaker, because I was asked by Channel 4, who had seen Reservoir Dogs, his first film, to go out to California and track him down, because I was then doing a film which was an examination of independent cinema in the 80s and 90s.
Most of the pictures out there surely
yes.
have nothing to do with money. You didn't take them to earn money, or did you?
No, I wasn't paid. I was explaining a little earlier that my 2 attempts through Vogue to shoot pictures both failed. One of V.S. Pritchett because I was unwell and wasn't able to make the appointment, and the other Ruth Prala Jafala, whose portrait was so shockingly bad that neither she, I, nor Condé Nast wanted to publish it.
You accepted that it was extraordinarily bad?
Yes.
What was wrong with it?
It wasn't a face that I chose to photograph. It was a face I was asked to photograph.
Ah.
That's the difference.
So you would find it difficult to take a really fine portrait of someone whose face you didn't particularly like? Or
David Hockney has only accepted 1 commission, and he's painted 5,000 portraits.
Absolutely.
1 commission. And I agree with him. You paint what you love, you paint what you want, you paint who you know, you paint who you hate. Perfect. When I photographed Dirk Bogarde, I could have killed him, and he could have killed me.
Because?
He hated to be photographed.
But he was a very photogenic man.
Yes.
And earned his living by being in front of a lens.
But this was towards the end of his life when he'd basically given up.
Okay.
And he didn't want, he knew somehow that I would get something of him that he didn't want to be gone. And as William Boyd said, he was a man who wore all these masks and he never told the truth. Told half the truth, quarter of the truth. He was a great actor, but that side of him was highly dubious, and I caught him.
Don't you think that a very considerable majority of people who are in the exhibition, famous people, wear masks? They put on some sort of character or some... maybe we all do.
It's not just the famous, it's all of us, every day.
And are you telling me then that the secret of taking a really good portrait is to get behind that mask?
Yes.
And how do you do it?
It's a combination of things. There's no magic bullet or formula. The advantage I had when I came to you and started the Elders project was that I'd always been interested in art. I thought that art could change me, make me a better person. And I still think that. I came to those people pre-planned. If I managed to photograph Benjamin Britten, who'd agreed to be photographed but died, I would have known something because I knew his music. I'd make sure that all those people, I wouldn't just go in. I'd done a great deal of homework. I could quote Jean Rhys back passages from Wide Sargasso Sea when I met her. You know, a lot of those people who are dealing with photographers and media people, you know, they come in with a set of questions or to take a photograph. They don't know who they're dealing with. I would never do that. I would, well, as I said, all the people that I photographed were my choices, not somebody else's.
And did you, during the session, talk to them about their work?
Absolutely, absolutely. For example, William Golding, who at that point, since has been tarnished, you know, badly with the brush of potential paedophilia, was that wasn't an issue at all. We were just talking about his enormous ability, and I charmed him, I think, because, and I really believed what I was saying. He said that he'd always wanted to be a poet, not a writer, not a novelist. And I think he published a slim volume of poems at the very opening of his career. Probably be worth, you know, a fortune now. And I said, William, your prose is poetry. And I read a passage back to him from one of the books, and tears almost came into his eyes. And he said, "You're very articulate." I said, "I'm not as articulate as you are, sir." So there was a kind of, and then that allowed me, plus with the camera, which he was absolutely fascinated by, I could then take that picture of him with every hair in place.
Now you've mentioned the camera. Tell us something about it, because it's not, I can list a dozen, 20, 30 famous photographers I've known. I know no one else who uses a camera like yours. Tell me about it and tell me why.
Manufactured by the Gandolfi brothers. Mahogany and brass, traditional cameras in the late 1800s. Gandolfi brothers, I was born here in Hampshire, and I was brought up in South London, Sydenham, Crystal Palace. And Penge is not far away, and that's where the Gandolfi brothers had their studio.
Gosh.
So, and they were on the phone. And at that point, I realised that the Gandolfi camera was, even then, a kind of unusual item. So, and Fred Gandolfi, they were wonderful. Albert, they were Cockneys, you know, who had inherited this business. And they were in their 70s, you know, and so it was towards the end of their career. You know, you're right. So I went round to photograph him, and at that point I had a plate camera, but it wasn't a Gandolfi. And he agreed reluctantly to be photographed, so I got the camera and said, no. So that's no good. Oh, he said, no. I won't be taking on anything with a Gandolfi. So for an hour and a half, we had to fiddle with my lens piece and thing, and he had to fit one of his Gandolfis up with my lens so that I could take the photograph of him, which is in that show, on a Gandolfi. And of course, once I'd done it, I ordered two. And then I got the third, which is the one that's on display, which is cherry wood, which is only, and they only ever made 6, 10 by 8, and it's never been used. The one in the case has never had.
Oh, I should have written that in the caption. This one is just for show.
Well, it's not. It's going to be used, but it hasn't been yet.
How do you? It is an extraordinary contrast. The sort of camera that you're describing and the whole business of setting it up and dealing with all that, with what everyone in this room has a camera in their hip pocket or whatever.
Yes.
We are told that 4 billion photographs are taken every day. Can one use a camera like that and still make great pictures?
No. Probably of the 4 billion, there's one great picture which is undoubtedly
isn't it?
It's undoubtedly accidental, and they wouldn't recognise it as being great. So I was saying to Derek earlier, you know, my definition of or when asked is photography and art. I say when an artist wields the camera. It's
perfectly fair.
But it's that simple.
It seems to me that there is a little panel of pictures in that exhibition of 12 pictures that almost look as if they've been taken by a mobile phone. And these are David Hockney in his swimming pool.
Oh yes.
Is that possible, or am I misreading them totally?
It was well before...
No, I understand that you didn't take them with that, but why are they different?
Oh, they're different because they had to be taken over a very concentrated period, and they involved an exercise, which was swimming the length and breadth of the pool. The idea being that I wanted, in photographic terms, to try and represent the extraordinary distortions that he managed to achieve through his paintings of the pools. Mm-hmm. Well, people say, well, why didn't you do it in colour? Because he did it in colour. I was looking for something different, a different way of looking, but something that would align with his view and his obsession and interest with pools in my own way, pointing to what he perhaps had seen by showing him within that context. And they were shot in a period of about 10 minutes. So yes, there was a mobility, and I was in the pool. It was a 35mm camera, just an ordinary camera with black and white negative. And so they've got maybe what you're talking about is a sort of immediacy rather than a formal, you know, my other portraits of him are formalised, and would have involved setting the camera up, getting him, talking, exchanging, waiting. This was just on the fly.
90-something% of the show, as you've mentioned it, are black and white photographs. Why do you prefer black and white to colour?
That's a very interesting question, and one that does crop up. And there are a number of explanations why black and white catches the eye more. And it's not just that. I've always thought that in the way that if you want to photograph trees, the best time of year is when the leaves have fallen, so late autumn through the winter into early spring. The analogy with black and white is that what you get is that sort of effect when you photograph a face in black and white. It's as if winter has come into the equation. And what you're seeing is what's underneath the flesh.
Getting behind the mask again.
Exactly. And black and white can do that, and it can do it in the landscape too. And a lot of people think that my landscape work is as good, if not better, than the portraits. And I think there's a great connection between the two. I think the erosion and changing of time and the seasons on the landscape and on the face is more or less equivalent.
Now, in this morning's Guardian, you nominate this photograph of 3 great photographers, as it happens, as your best photograph. I've known it for years because very generously you gave me print of it a long time ago, and it's hung in our house ever since. Why have you given it such a high rating?
Well, I have to correct you, and this
never.
And this will mean that I'll never be published in The Guardian ever again. I sent them a dozen pictures and they chose that one.
What good taste they have.
Indeed. But the reason that that picture has become well known is simply that those three photographers are three of the greatest photographers that I've ever encountered, and certainly they'd never sat down all three together. That was the one and only time that all three of them, they knew each other individually, but they'd never sat down, the three of them together.
I still want to know why, however famous the photographers are, and however important an occasion it was that they met for the first time, why is it a great photograph?
Oh, you'd have to answer that. I don't. I think it's a rather upmarket snap, frankly. I just got lucky. I got lucky. I had the equipment, the Gandolfi and so on, so that they were all absolutely focused on that.
And that would help photographers, wouldn't it? They'd
Oh,
see
they
an
loved
unusual
it.
camera.
Oh, they loved it. Yeah, I was immediately embraced. It was fine, and then they were relaxed. So there were certain things. I mean, I'm making light of it. Yes, it was a lucky snap, but very, very well organised. Which is sometimes you get lucky, you know.
Who are the photographers who have most influenced you, have most affected your type of photography?
Well, actually, and you're the great expert, Julia Margaret Cameron, because she did basically what I do, which is to get an old plate camera, and sometimes it's a little bit out of focus, but who gives a shit? And she wanted to meet the great and the good. You know, her relationships, as you know better than anyone, were with science, you know, philosophers, scientists, and so on. She was fascinating, and she was a great photographer of children as well. You know, her subject matter was broad, and it was the essentials. Piece of film, a bit of light, subject matter, and magic.
You're the opposite of another great photographer I admired and I've commissioned and worked with, Arnold Newman.
Yes.
Who tried in every photograph to show what the person would do for a living. And you don't do that very often. All right, you have Henry Moore sitting in front of a wonderful sculpture and so on, but most of the time it's the face.
Well, I think the face tells a story, you know, whether they're an accountant, which would be unusual for me to photograph, or an author. August Sander was the greatest example of that, because of course he did a whole series of German workers, and so that would be my influence, and the pastry chef for me is one of the great photographs of all time, because that is the man in his environment proudly demonstrating his skill or his calling. Yet it's a great portrait. So occasionally you can do that. I mean, I photographed Fred Gandolfi making a camera.
This was the poor curator's task, but of course for every picture that's in a show, there's a dozen or 20 or more that we couldn't include. One had to make a choice all the time. And I hope you respect the choice. You certainly seem to be fairly encouraging of it. But, you know, there's no way we can show everything.
No. Well, it'd be wonderful if you. I mean, I wouldn't want any other curator. You were chosen for a very good reason. But actually, you could send in half a dozen curators to my archive, and they come out with different shows.
Totally different, of course.
And that's rather thrilling. It won't happen, but you know, there it is. I think the question for, you know, quite a lot of people approaching my age is, what do you do with your archives? You know, do you slim it down and say, well, out of 5,000 pictures, you know, there are 100 which make the grade, and we just get rid of the rest. But the rest are quite interesting for other reasons. You know, when I was shooting the eldest show, I would take probably 4 dark slides, which would have a sheet of film either side, so 8. So the maximum I would shoot on with those people like Henry Moore or A.J. Eyre or Gombrich or whoever it was, would be 8. And then we'd sit down and choose 1 or 2. All those negatives are in a box.
Okay.
Quite safe. And I've got the ones from the show, which are that thick, and I've got ones from, you know, which weren't. Yes,
okay.
and they're interesting because, well, interesting for someone else to look at, because they might say, well, that's the one.
I might not agree with my choice.
Exactly.
I accept that.
Yeah.
And you have, all right, you're thinking about what happens to your archive, but there are a number of those portraits in the portrait gallery already.
Yes.
There are a number of your landscape in the National Museum of Wales already, so some national museums have your work. The moment, I think, for me, this photographic exhibition looks terrific. I think it really works very, very well, fills the space of this lovely gallery very, very well. Congratulations and thanks.